This fight was very hard in the 19th century and even in the early 20th century. This picture shows that here we've got a priest, this is a caricature, of course, to denounce the dominance of the church in education, you see. So the Republicans and the secular groups and movements would try to establish a form of education without the church, and of course the church reacts to this because they see that it's losing its power, its dominance over the country. So there will be a development of education both on the Republican and secular side and on the Catholic and religious side. And this fight will end with we could call it a victory of the Republican side when public schooling became compulsory at the end of the 19th century in France. So all children youth were supposed to get a Republican secular education to the age of 13. So the Republican school was supposed to be a godless school. That was the term that was used. But of course, the Catholic and religious schools didn't disappear. They were also they continued to exist. And there was a fight, there was we could call it a fight between the two movements. With industrialization also we must note that there was, and with compulsory schooling, there was more and more free time, both for workers, but mostly for children and youth. So this fight for dominance between the school, the Republican school and secular school and the church was also going on extracurricular time, after school time. So it means that the Catholic groups and the church, they started taking care of children outside school and organizing youth camps and holiday camps. So this is an example from an early 20th century Catholic youth camp near Paris. And of course the Republicans and the secular groups, they did the same. So they started organizing youth camps, but and mostly it was led by, some of them, or a lot of them, were led by school teachers that would take the children after school for activities like sports activities, and then also during the holidays. So this is, for example, another picture representing a group of children gathering. No, this is the school of the village, and they're going for a trip to the mountains, and so the instituteur, the school teacher, is leading the group. Right, another source is, so that's a different source to popular education and then later animation, is with adults. Because in the 19th century, of course, as you know, with the Industrial Revolution, a class of people called sometimes the working class developed in a lot of Western countries. And there was also a need for education for these people. And they organized, there were a number of movements, workers' movements, who took to organize themselves and created a number of places where they could get some education, self-education, and to promote self-organization. I don't know if you have these things in Finland. In England, for example, in Scotland, they were called labour or trade councils. These were places where the workers could meet and get some form of training. Are you aware of anything like this in Finland? This is a building in the south of France. They were called Bourses du Travail. And this is also one of the sources of animation, because as I said at the beginning, it's not only about young people, so this is more related to yeah, this is more adult education. And a third stream, a third source, we could say, is still in relation with education, is a number of initiatives from mostly the second half of the 19th century to the into the 20th century, of experimental schools. So this is one example. This was called a libertarian school, called the beehive. You know, a beehive is, you know, what is it in Finnish, where the bees gather to produce honey? Yeah? So this was the name of the school. It was mostly based on what is called experiential learning. It means it's through experience that the children are going to learn by themselves. Well, they are guided by adults, but it as opposed to a more formal kind of teaching where the teacher is going to bring knowledge. Then in these types of initiatives, this is one among many, it's based on experience. So this is another source. Right, so we'll move to the 20th century now, at last. So éducation populaire, popular education, is a term which refers to a number of organizations, associations. It's a movement with all the sources I've just mentioned. And it's meant to, it has a purpose of education, outside work or school. It is also related to leisure, we can say, but that will come a little later. And those movements appeared in the first half of the 20th century, but developed mainly after World War II in France. So these are a number of associations that for foyers ruraux is for rural is rural, the countryside. People and culture, I'm translating literally. This is about teaching, but it's mainly involved in outside school also activities. And this is difficult to translate, but it's another movement of éducation populaire. There are quite a number in France. These movements, they, as I said, they were not only concerned with youth, but we must say that the category of youth and the idea of youth policy really emerged in France in the late 1930s and during World War II. Then this idea of a youth policy developed in the state, and the first ministry of youth, we could say, was created during World War II. And then after World War II, youth policies as such started to develop. And youth policy was mainly organized in partnership with those organizations that they were commissioned. They had the mission to take care of young people outside school. Right. So this is a picture from the 60s. These relate to the 50s, 1950s and 60s in France, where with a growing urbanization and the creation of very, very big districts, neighborhoods with housing estates, as you can see, multi-story buildings, huge ones, with populations coming from the countryside, but also from foreign countries and former colonies, because as you may know, France was a colonial empire from the 18th century, or even before, but then until the late 20th century, there were colonies, the last one being Algeria, which became independent in the 60s. So there were people coming from the countryside to work in the cities, and also then a little later, people coming from abroad, mostly from North Africa, but also a lot from Portugal, Spain and Italy. So to house these people, there were huge building programs that developed in the 50s and 60s. And then the people who were volunteers, I forgot to mention that, but in the movements of popular education I mentioned on the slide before, most of the people who worked there worked as volunteers. And then there was a real need for professionalization, because it wasn't possible to cope with these new populations only with volunteers, and also because the state was becoming aware of the stakes and the necessity to have professional workers. So this is where we start really, we start talking about animation. The term appears in the 60s, late 50s and 60s, and it is seen as a professionalization of those movements of popular education I mentioned before. So there were a number of facilities that were built in those years, what you may call youth houses, if I understand well. In France, that would be Maison des Jeunes, houses for young people, Maison des Jeunes et de la Culture. And the word culture here is important because it's also one of the key terms in the post-war years is culture. And the idea that culture is going to be democratized. So I can imagine that you're familiar with this idea that there was a movement, I don't know when this or how it happened in Finland, but of democratization of culture. So culture does not only belong to the elites, but should be shared, by everyone in the country. So there was this very huge movement. Culture and the arts should be, everyone should be able to access to culture. So then these houses of youth and culture, among other kinds of facilities, were built massively in the 60s. Like, I don't know, 10 of those houses a week at the peak time. So that was really and then professional workers were needed for them, for these places. And this is where animation really emerged as a professional field. So this is one of these Maisons des Jeunes et de la Culture, MJC. This is one in the Paris metropolitan area in the mid-60s. This building, right in the middle, of the neighborhood, where people could come, and then they could practice. They were offered cultural activities, sports activities, workshops. Young people could meet, play games. Well, play games. There were, pool or whatever.